Hi all. Well, sorry for being slightly later for the audience, because sometimes you have those technical issues, and you cannot avoid this when you have an online webinar. So, good evening and good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are, and welcome. I'm Megi Benia. I'm founder and director of Strategic Security Initiative, SSI, as well as project coordinator for Southeast Europe and Black Sea region program at Platform for Peace and Humanity. And I will be moderating today's discussion on foreign information manipulation and interference in Armenia and beyond. In general, well, I think that this topic of information operations has never been as relevant as it is today. Of course, those who have been vulnerable for years, especially in this region, countries like Georgia, now Armenia, and also countries in Central and Eastern Europe, we have been living for decades with this challenge, and we know. More or less, we know how to deal with that. At least we know what it is. But right now, more and more countries globally realize what it is and how dangerous the outcomes and consequences might be. So over the past decade, especially for the couple of years, for recent years, information space has become an increasingly important place for geopolitical competition. Why? Because states usually do not only rely on military, economic, or diplomatic tools to influence societies and to influence countries and to achieve their strategic interests, right? And they heavily rely on information manipulations in order to shape public perceptions, shape public debates, and more importantly, if not most importantly, affect how they perceive political events and security challenges. Of course, in this reality, among the actors of international relations, the most interesting for us in this region, and not only is Russia, because their formation operations are probably the most sophisticated, most active, and with far-reaching consequences, and if in comparison to others, I would say. In this particular setting, it is important to take into account that for Russia, it is always important to activate and make increasingly relevant the use of information manipulations, especially during the period of political changes or election competition. Why? Because during this period, public attention is heightened, and this is when information control becomes important, because this is how you can shape political outcomes. And this is precisely why in this context, it is important to discuss Armenia and recent developments in Armenia. And that is why we decided to produce this report, because Armenia right now, as you all know, is navigating through domestic, regional, and geopolitical transformations. And that's why it is important to understand how external actors, and especially Russia, try to influence the setting there. This report that is specifically tries to underline and pay attention to disinformation, and not only information manipulation narratives produced by Russia and Russia-related actors in Armenia during the pre-election period, was produced jointly by Strategic Security Initiative and Platform for Peace and Humanity. I hope you had a chance to see the report. If not, please read it, share it, and provide your reflections in our social media accounts and web pages of both organizations. Today's discussion brings together experts with diverse regional and thematic perspectives, and I'm very proud to have you with us, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you, our distinguished speakers, and grateful to all of you who are joining us today. I hope you will enjoy this discussion. And having said that, I want to open this discussion and go to Mariam. Mariam Gamdlishvili. Mariam is a very good friend of mine and my colleague. She is Associate Director of Strategic Security Initiative and head of its Center for Strategic Communications, a former Georgian civil servant and diplomat. She specializes in foreign policy, strategic communications, disinformation, and public diplomacy. She has extensive teaching experience and has contributed to numerous international projects, including SM Muskie, Fulbright, Erasmus Plus, and UK FCDO Scholar. Mariam is currently a PhD candidate in international relations at Tbilisi State University. Mariam, thank you for being with us, and thank you for your contribution and help during the elaboration of the report and also preparation of this webinar. Before we go to the before we go to specific cases and specific key findings of our report, I would like you to elaborate on this concept of foreign information manipulation and interference, shortly called FIMI, what it is, to explain to the audience what is kind of providing the theoretical framework, how this concept has evolved in recent years, and what are the key aspects that we need to pay attention to. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Megi, for such an introduction. I'm very happy and honored to be here with you all. Happy to see familiar surnames, faces. Thanks to our speakers who joined us today. And yeah, thank you for the question, first of all. And I think that the best way to answer to it is just to start with a kind of sort of the simple observations that I've seen and there were throughout these years. Because if it was 5 or 6 years ago, if we were having this discussion, we would most likely be talking about disinformation. But today, we increasingly talk about the foreign information manipulation and interference or FIMI, the abbreviature that is being used right now. And the shift itself in terminology and concept itself is not really accidental because it really reflects a kind of much deeper change in how the governments, the researchers, practitioners, the industry itself were used to call, back in the years that it is an disinformation industry. So how all of us understand the contemporary information threats that are out there. And really, for many years, the dominant framework was actually disinformation as such, with a focus on false information, fake news, some fabricated stories, and fact-checking as a tool to combat it. So the assumption was that the primary challenge was actually to identify the inaccurate information or false information, misleading information, and correct it. However, a series of developments, including the election interference campaigns that we've seen throughout the latest years, information operations that have been targeting the democratic societies, the COVID pandemics, and of course, the most recent Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, really demonstrated and showed that the disinformation framework itself is actually too narrow. Actually, as the researchers, the community analysts, we really started to realize that many influence operations were not primarily just about spreading the lies. Sometimes the information that has been shared was actually entirely true or partially true. Or has been selectively presented or amplified out of proportion or by certain actors, or could involve some genuine events, but be framed in a very manipulative way. And sometimes the manipulation itself had to do little with content, but much more with the coordination part, amplification, origin of it, and most importantly, the exploitation of the societal vulnerabilities and the narratives that the communities are very much vulnerable to. So, in other words, the problem was not just disinformation as such. The problem was manipulation and manipulation with narratives in particular. So this realization, again, led to the emergence of the FIMI concept as we know it now and use it, which has been increasingly adopted by the European Union and the international partners over the last several years. And if we go to the definition, as for example, the EU defines it, foreign information manipulation and interference would be a coordinated and intentional patterns of behavior that are conducted by foreign actors that seek to negatively affect political processes, public debate, democratic institutions, and societal resilience as such. And here I would like to also emphasize a particular phrase. So we look at the patterns of the behavior. And maybe perhaps it's kind of the most important distinction that we have between the disinformation framework that we had before and the FIMI framework. Again, if we look at the disinformation as such, it really focuses on content. With FIMI, we try to focus on behavior and how this behavior is changed and shaped. If we look again at the disinformation, it really asks for a kind of particular statement or recognition of what is true or what is false. Again, with FIMI, we are looking at who is manipulating the content, the information environment itself, through what kind of methods, what is the strategic person and what purpose, and what is the intended effect of this action. And here we see this major kind of the conceptual and definition shift. We just no longer examine some sort of posts and react to them in isolation. We try to look at the ecosystem, network, narrative, and with our report, and Tigran, I know he will go into the details, what we've identified and what we saw with the narratives. Most importantly, we see that. So we examine them, we see how they are amplified, what emotional techniques and emotional manipulation techniques are being used there. And we also kind of see how information moves across the platforms and communities. And this brings me to a second very important point, that the modern influence operations are actually increasingly narrative driven rather than the fact driven. And again, in our report, we see all sorts of different narratives, like, for example, that Pashinyan would destroy the country, or that there is the possibility of Ukrainization of Armenia, or that Russia is the only guarantor of the peace and security, So these are the narratives rather than facts that can be spread. And narrative is not just a claim. The narrative as a framework really helps to to people. It helps to interpret the reality and somehow maybe adjust that reality to themselves. It kind of tells who is responsible for the problem, or who is the problem, or who is a threat, who can provide security, who can be trusted, what future should be feared or desired, or what kind of future is ahead of us. So that's why narratives are very powerful, because it really simplify the complexity of the very rapid information environment that is out there. And most importantly, the narratives, they provide this emotional and psychological certainty during the periods of uncertainty. So especially when we are in such a rapidly fast-paced environment, and our phones are giving us, tons of information, and we are consuming tons of information daily, and just like every second, every minute. Because narratives operate at a kind of the deeper level than the individual fact as such, or information as such, they're often more resilient, I would say, than the fact-checking efforts. And that's why the modern and what we've seen throughout the past years, the contemporary influence operations, they really focus less on persuading people of a specific falsehood or, some fake news and disinformation, and more are focusing on how people understand the world around them. And the third kind of evolution part from disinformation industry to the FIMI industry, I would call it, is also it concerns the role of emotions. And historically, propaganda was often associated with ideological persuasion. But today, we see that information operations really prioritize and really focus on emotional manipulation. And again, research across multiple regions, and especially Georgia and South Caucasus and Central Europe and many others, they consistently show that the content that provokes fear, anger, anxiety, humiliation, outrage, identity-based emotions, and very vulnerable, issues that raised in certain communities or countries, they tend to spread further and generate sort of the higher engagement than the factual or the policy-oriented communication. And in some way, it's not the coincidence, because the influence actors, they understand that emotional reactions often shape the political behavior much, much, much more effectively than just the rational arguments or the pure communication in its pure form. And again, if we go back to the emotions, fear will be particularly powerful because, again, it encourages some binary thinking, it encourages polarization, it reduces the sort of the complexity, and so the communities are playing on the emotions, and it also kind of increases the receptiveness to simplified explanations, strong narratives that are then spread in the targeted audiences. And again, that's why I think the security-related messaging also frequently plays a central role in the information operations. And again, we've seen that in the Armenian case as well, and we go deeper into it, because the security concerns as such, they touch upon of some of the most fundamental human needs that we have. So it's just safety, stability, survival, predictability, right? We all want to live in peace. And of course, when societies face uncertainty, conflict, economic stress, social stress, political polarization, security-centered narratives, they become very, very influential. And another closely related to that trend is that we observe the increasing frequency in the identity-based manipulations as well. So questions of national identity, religion, culture, history, language, tradition, values has become a central battleground in the contemporary information environments. Why it is so? Because again, if we revert to the emotions part, identity is also deeply emotional because, people may change opinions, but we rarely change our identities and how we identify ourselves. And as a result, the narratives that are framed around identity often generate very strong reactions than those that are framed again in the around policy or just the communication in its pure form. And across multiple regions, again, influence actors, they increasingly seek to mobilize audiences by presenting political questions as a sort of the existential struggles that involve culture, tradition, morality, national survival, and again, all sorts of the vulnerable topics that are in that moment or historically in those communities. And again, in case of Georgia, for example, we've seen all sorts of that kind of narratives. You can name it, like it's the issues of the David Gavreji, for example, or the all sorts of the emotional and vulnerable topics that can be out there. And many contemporary influence operations, they're not really trying or not necessarily trying to convince people to support a specific foreign actor. They actually seek to, but sometimes in the case of Russia, they actually tell you who to support. But in most cases, they seek to undermine trust. And it really doesn't matter in what. It starts with institutions, elections, media, democratic processes, trust in public authorities, trust in expertise as such. And in most cases, objective is not the persuasion, but confusion. So confusion, cynicism, and not a support for someone or some actor, but disengagement. And if the citizens and people and the society come to believe that every institution is, corrupt, every election is manipulated, every media outlet is dishonest, any kind of democratic political process is meaningless. Democratic resilience as such and resilience in the communities becomes significantly weaker. And I think this is one of the most important insights that the FIMI framework helps us to understand. And the target is not really the public opinion itself. And as I already mentioned, the target is actually trust. And yeah, information really moves very rapidly between the messaging applications, social media platforms, influencers, online community, proxy media outlets, and political actors. And one of the insights that you also will see in the report, and you probably seen, is actually this part of the amplification and the cross-platform amplification, because a narrative can emerge in one digital space, and again now with the too rapid development of technology, AI, the narratives, they are migrating into another, and they are another platforms, and they're picked up by influencers, repeated by certain political actors, amplified by various online communities, and eventually they enter and mainstream the public discourse as well. Understanding this kind of the dynamics became also the central part of the FIMI analysis. Again, the growing role of technology is out there and is the kind of, reason for that. If we just to wrap up what we are dealing with when we are talking about the FIMI is actually that the most successful influence operations are not those that convince people to believe something. They are those, I think, that convince that they convince people that nothing can be actually believed. So again, no institution deserves trust, or no election is legitimate, or no information source is credible. And that any kind of democratic process, and especially elections, can deliver results. So, and when we see that the citizens and people and communities lose confidence in their ability to distinguish truth from manipulation, democratic societies become really, 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 really vulnerable. And that's precisely why the shift from the disinformation to FIMI actually matters. Because the challenge itself is much, much more bigger than just the false information, or as we would be, responding to the disinformation back in the years. There is the deliberate, and the biggest challenge is the deliberate manipulation of information environments by actors that are pursuing certain strategic objectives. And yeah, if we are here to, in a way respond to it effectively, we must really not only focus on the content, but for sure on the behavior, networks, narratives, societal vulnerabilities, and resilience itself. And again, this is something that has been expanded in the report, and we've seen very interesting examples of narratives and the interference in the Armenian elections. So I hope I didn't take too long, and thank you very much for the question, Megi. And yeah, I think we can continue the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Mariam, for providing this very important and interesting theoretical framework. I think that was essential for everybody, especially for those who does not have much of the experience dealing with these issues to understand what it is and what we are talking about before moving to specific examples. Before moving to our next speaker, I will just want to remind the audience that you have a chance to ask questions through the Q&A section that we have here in the meetings environment. And also, if you want to ask a question in person, just raise your hand and I will navigate that after the discussion. We'll have approximately 20 minutes for that at the end of the meeting. So now we are moving to Tigran Melikian. Tigran is a researcher and policy analyst with the Southeast and Black Sea region program at the Platform for Peace and Humanity, based between the Netherlands and Armenia. He specializes in democratic processes, social inclusion, and social political developments in the South Caucasus. He holds a master's degree in sociology from Vrije University of Amsterdam, sorry for my Dutch pronunciation, and has been affiliated with CRRC Armenia since 2023, contributing to research and on public opinion, so civic space, gender, and regional political dynamics. I would like to use the opportunity to thank Tigran because his contribution to the report was invaluable, definitely. It is essential in this kind of activities to have somebody on the ground to correct you, because there's always one thing how your neighbors or even international community perceives what is going on the ground, and another thing is how it is actually going on the ground. So thank you for that. I would just want you to ask to briefly elaborate for us what are the key findings of our report, specifically focusing on narratives that were spread by Russia and Russia-affiliated actors during the pre-election period in Armenia, and most importantly, what were the objectives of those narratives and activities. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you as well, dear Megi, for introducing me, but also for taking initiative in this report, as well as coordinating specifically pre-election periods, especially here in Armenia, and working for a research company here is very hectic. So I must say, in a way, that I'm also pleased and happy that it's sort of over for now, but I will definitely dive a little bit deeper into the findings of the report. Just a quick summary beforehand, of which the elections at a glance for those that may have not read the report yet or are not very aware of how the system in Armenia works. So the elections were this Sunday for the National Assembly 5-year term. The Hond method is used as a system, of which 101 seats are there, including 4 reserved seats for national minorities. In this cycle, we had 105 seats in total. The threshold is 4% for single parties and 8% for alliances that participate. There's a stable majority rule. There were approximately 2.5 million registered voters. The turnout was almost 59%, which is the highest since 2018, though must be mentioned that in 2018 and 2021 snap elections were held. This year there were 18 contestants, of which 16 were parties, and there were 2 alliances, counting up to almost 2,000 candidates, of which 30% were women. Civil Contract Party, led by the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, has been in power since 2018, the Velvet Revolution, and as a headline result, they have won 49.8% of the votes, which retains a single-party governing majority. The other 3 major parties to watch were Strong Armenia, led by Samvel Karapetyan, pro-Russia, Armenian-Russian oligarch, who got 23% of the votes. Then we have the Armenia Alliance from Robert Kolcharyan, also pro-Russian ex-president, who received almost 10% of the votes. And finally, another oligarch, Gagik Tsarukian, also pro-Russia, from prosperous Armenia, who almost has 4%, but approximately 50 to 100 votes short for the threshold. Hence, a recounting is requested. So we have assessed indeed some of the main narratives that we could find during a specific time frame. We started approximately around April and finalized approximately mid to end May, which also means that we have not been able, as a caution and warning, not been able to capture everything, but we used a qualitative narrative analysis, mainly open source, digital monitoring, as well as mainly in English, but also where relevant Armenian and Russian sources were found. Sources included but were not limited to Telegram, Facebook, X, YouTube, TikTok, etc. So in our report, we have, from the time frame that we analyzed, 5 core narratives identified. The first one, and some of them, if not most of them, Mariam has already touched upon. But the first one is that Russia is Armenia's indispensable security partner, of which the core claim is that Armenia's security and survival basically is depending on Russia, and there exist no credible alternatives. The emotional lever was mainly dependency and insecurity, targeting security-oriented and older voters, as well as economically vulnerable groups that are mainly exposed to Russian language media. Examples that were used included the Gyumri military base, a large Russian military base in the second city of Armenia, but also the CSTO, the Security Collective, and the gas dependence of Armenia for fairly low prices, but also citing that as proof that Armenia basically cannot stand alone. And the strategic goal was to preserve Russian influence and discourage geopolitical diversification. The second narrative was the myth of Western protection, where US and the EU are framed, or the core claim is more as a symbolic words and monitoring, but cannot really provide security guarantees. The main emotional lever here was distrust and also disappointment, targeting undecided, skeptical, security-focused voters. Examples of narratives include that the West didn't intervene in the 2020 war or in the 2023 displacement as much, that the EU monitoring mission that was employed in Armenia mainly dismissed the theater, or that the French weapons that Armenia has purchased, such as the Caesar howitzers, were framed rather provocative or useless, and even sources that have claimed them to be fake. But also Lavrov calling the EU election support an admission of guilt. And the strategic goal there was mainly to undermine the trust in Western partnerships and also democratic alignment. The third narrative was mainly about delegitimizing the Armenian government. The core claim was mainly to showcase or prove that Pashinyan's leadership is weak, externally controlled, responsible for national decline and losses, with a lot of anger and humiliation as emotional lever, targeting dissatisfied voters, but also people rather placing themselves as conservatives or audiences that care for post-war developments. Examples included also the surrendered Nagorno-Karabakh frame or Western puppet, but also a lot of AI fabrications here, where news that Pashinyan and Macron have signed a secret deal, but also AI videos showcasing Pashinyan as a very small, fragile, not strong leader, etc. The strategic goal was mainly to erode trust in the democratic governance in Armenia and its political leadership. Another major claim, narrative that was identified, also mentioned by Mariam, very common, is regarding identity, faith and traditional values supposedly under threat, mainly because of Western influence to threaten the Armenian identity, religion, morality, resulting or mainly levering on cultural anxiety and moral panic. Especially religious communities, conservatives, nationalists, and also parts of the diaspora seem to be, the Armenian diaspora seem to be targeted. And very common examples were regarding the church and state tensions that have been in the media and present in the past months, if not 1 or 2 years already, but also the traditional family messaging and anti-LGBTQ plus framing when or if integrating into the EU. And this was mainly to support mobilizing anti-Western sentiments through identity and casting Russia as a defender of tradition and the good values. And the final narrative, but definitely not the least one, is regarding fear, collapse, and the Ukrainization of Armenia. That continuing to drift more towards the West would also mean war, collapse, territorial fragmentation, very highly focusing on existential fear amongst people. This target was also very broadly used and affected due to the very recent war and post-war situation in Armenia, the insecurity that still exists, trauma. And examples here is that Armenia could become a next Ukraine, warnings that were sort of voiced out, destroyed city and refugee imagery, economic collapse, gas price scenarios, reinforced at the top by Putin's May 9 statement, where he was linking the EU accession to Ukraine's fate, basically. The strategic goal there was to cultivate geopolitical fatalism and psychological dependency, and to shut down the rationale of deliberation. There we have formed a brief comparative risk assessment, of which the fear Ukrainization narrative was definitely ranked highest risk overall. And the government delegitimization scored very high on the direct election relevance, based on our assessment. Some cross-cutting findings also include that Telegram is definitely an engine room where it incubates narratives before they also migrate to other platforms. AI-generated content, fake media branding, coordinated repostings, and were extremely and increasingly visible. But again, as Mariam mentioned, it has definitely exploited existing vulnerabilities, specifically the post-war trauma in Armenia, but also the rather low institutional trust, depolarization, rather than inventing grievances. Strategic objective is to preserve Russian influence by weakening the democratic trust in Armenia and discourage Armenia's geopolitical diversification. Well, based on those narratives, findings, and analysis, we have summarized several recommendations in the report. That was, if I'm not mistaken, the main narratives used. Of course, there are definitely some additional or deepening thematics of manipulation that are included both within the report, but also you may have noticed in the final week escalations before the elections. But they are mainly within the same narrative groups as mentioned earlier, the 5. But what is good to mention is that beyond information, other means were basically exercised to pressure the elections, including the economic means of where trade restrictions at the end of May were implemented against Armenian flowers, mineral water, alcohol, agricultural goods, also the Eurasian Economic Union demanding that Armenia should hold a referendum to choose between the bloc and the EU, threats to increase gas prices, recalling of the ambassador, and another external pressure was definitely the diaspora, an alleged scheme to transport, which was thought approximately 100,000 voters from Russia, funded to support extra votes mainly for Samvel Karapetyan. The exact numbers, I'm not sure if that has been already analyzed, but definitely interesting to take into account.
Great, thank you, Tigran. It was a really interesting summary of this very long report, I would say. We initially wouldn't expect it to be so long, but it was such a demanding topic that we couldn't do otherwise. So I'm so grateful for your intervention here and also your support throughout the report. Now we are moving to our next speaker, Mr. Thomas de Waal, and it's a great honor of mine and great honor of the organization to have you here, sir. And thank you for accepting our invitation. And I would like to specifically thank the head of International Security Program here at Strategic Security Initiative, Irina Mamulashvili, for making your participation possible. You don't need an introduction. all of the people know you here well, but I'll still provide it. Mr. de Waal is a senior fellow at Carnegie Europe and one of the leading experts on Eastern Europe and South Caucasus. He's the author of several influential books, a former journalist with the BBC, the Moscow Times, the Times, and The Economist. He has spent more than 3 decades researching and reporting on the Caucasus, Russia, and the regional conflicts. Mr. de Waal, I would like you to provide an overview of these developments that are happening in Armenia in general, and especially the FIMI narratives and Russia influence operations in the broader regional context and in the context of Russia's wider strategy towards the South Caucasus. Yeah, thank you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad to be with you this afternoon. Yes, I mean, I think what we're seeing is quite interesting in the sense that obviously Mr. Pashinyan's civil contract party won the election with basically half the vote. And despite Russia's long history in Armenia, despite the disinformation and influence campaigns we've been hearing about, Russia's efforts were not successful. And so I think it's worth looking at this broader context, and that this obviously comes after the Russian failure in Moldova last year, a country which, unlike Armenia, has a large Russian-speaking population who can be relied on, more credibly to support opposition candidates. So I think this speaks to a general decline in Russian influence, the fact that these influence campaigns are not having the effect that they might have had a few years ago. In the specific case of the South Caucasus, I think it speaks to the fact that this region, it's impossible for Russia to keep up its efforts throughout the former Soviet space, and therefore I think Russia is heavily distracted by Ukraine. In that sense, the South Caucasus has something of a breathing space. We're seeing, obviously, as has been mentioned, the banning of Armenian agricultural exports, things like flowers and strawberries. Even we've been told with the banning of things as unsanitary, which actually were still growing. And so extraordinary efforts like this. This reminds us of previous attempts to call Georgian agricultural products and bourgeoisie unsanitary. The same thing was done in Moldova. And in both those cases, those countries suffered economic pain, but as a result, they ended up diversifying their economies under that kind of pressure. So I think we're seeing broadly, I think, that these campaigns continue, but they're not having the effect that one might expect. An additional reason in Armenia was the failure to, I think, to find a strong candidate. Sambel Karapetyan, I think, had never been in politics. He's a business figure. He couldn't participate in the election due to his dual citizenship, being a Russian and an Armenian. He therefore had to rely on his son and his nephew, who were not household names in Armenia. Even with that, he did collect the largest amount of the protest vote, 23% of the vote. But I think he was not a strong candidate. Equally, we also saw the quite open threat from Moscow, that from Putin, that Armenia should make a choice. There should be a referendum on does it participate in the continue to participate in the Eurasian Economic Union or join the EU. I think for the Armenian government, this is a false choice. There's no way they can leave the Eurasian Economic Union at the moment. The economy is heavily oriented towards that union, and that will continue really so long as Armenia's borders are closed. This was billed as a joint statement by Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. So I thought it was very interesting that one of the first world leaders who congratulated Mr. Pashinyan was actually Kazakh President Tokayev. I think that was a signal that Kazakhstan was not such a strong and willing contributor to that statement as Russia was. And we're still waiting for the proper Russian reaction to the results. Officially, they say they're waiting to see the full results, but clearly Russia is, I think, has a dilemma on its hands in Armenia, that the instruments they have are mainly negative instruments. They are instruments of economic punishment, which certainly can cause problems for Armenia, but also, I think, would further alienate the Armenian population from Russia. So I think this is the bigger context that we're seeing. And I would argue that the South Caucasus is increasingly a multipolar region. I think it's a mistake, as some people do, to call it a bipolar region divided between Russia and the West. Many other actors are there. We can name China. We can name Turkey, the Gulf states. India is now quite a strong partner of Armenia. So, in that context, Russia, I think, is struggling to maintain its former influence. And there's many reasons for that. There's a kind of cumulative reason over the years. There's the reason of Russia's distraction in Ukraine. But I think a key reason is that Russia's main lever of influence over Armenia and Azerbaijan was the Karabakh conflict. And with the loss of Karabakh in 2023, a very painful and tragic loss for Armenians, that conflict was basically ended. It was ended with an Azerbaijani victory. And this, in turn, I think, meant that Russia lost its main instrument of control over both countries. It's no coincidence that in 2025, looking for a venue to initial a peace agreement and to make an agreement on a transit route across Armenia, that the two sides went to the United States and not to Russia. They felt sufficiently confident to denounce the agreement they'd made with Russia in November 2020 and to meet in the White House in the United States. So the United States is therefore also a player. But let's also be a little bit honest about Mr. Pashinyan. He's a charismatic but quite erratic and divisive figure in Armenia. He also made some quite, he also, is a master of the information narratives. And he made some quite dramatic warnings, which I think were quite scaremongering warnings during the election. He said, if you don't vote for me, there's going to be war with Azerbaijan. He said that a number of times. And what we now have is a quite delicate situation where Mr. Pashinyan has won, his party has won the election, can form a government, but he lacks the 2/3 majority that he needs in parliament for to call a new referendum on a new constitution. That's important because this is a prerequisite for Azerbaijan to sign the peace agreement. Azerbaijan says it won't sign the peace agreement until Armenia has a new constitution which removes the reference in the old constitution to the Declaration of Independence of 1990, which mentions the union of Karabakh and Armenia. So, I think you'll know this issue, but basically Azerbaijan is insisting that in the current constitution there is still a territorial claim on Azerbaijan. Now, we can argue whether this was a clever point to raise or whether this was just Azerbaijan playing for time. I don't think very few people, I think, have noticed this provision in the constitution. But this is where we are now. And if it becomes clear in the next few weeks as the new parliament meets, possibly there might be a boycott of the parliament by Karapetyan's party. There may be some scenarios, but if the votes are counted, the seats are made, and indeed the parliament sits without Mr. Pashinyan having a 2/3 majority, then we are in a kind of bit of an impasse around the peace agreement, because it will be impossible for him to call a referendum on a new constitution, in which case the ball is very much in the court of Azerbaijan and Turkey. If they want to see this peace process move forward, they will have to do something, can't find another way. And let's be clear about this, all of this impasse plays to Russia's strength. Russia wants to delay peace agreement, wants to delay the opening of the border between Azerbaijan and Turkey. This is basically what Armenia's isolation is the main reason it can keep the economic assets and the semi-control it has in Armenia. So this is a very important moment I think, for Western actors, for Azerbaijan and Turkey to consider their options to move things forward, and for the progress that has been made over the last few years not to be lost. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much. Of course, as always, it was wonderful. I mean, elaborating in the context of regional dynamics. It was really interesting and valuable. Thank you very much. Now we are moving to our next, last but not least, speaker, Jan Cingel. Jan, it's nice to have you here once again, and it's nice to meet you after so many years online, but still, I hope we will have a chance to meet in person again. Jan is the founder and president of Strategic Analysis and the former research fellow and head of the European Neighborhood Program at Globsec Policy Institute. His expertise covers the Western Balkans, South Caucasus, radicalization, violent extremism, NATO, and EU integration. He has led numerous projects across the Western Balkans and South Caucasus, and previously worked at the Ministry of Defense of the Slovak Republic. Jan is also a co-founder of the famous Globsec Forum. Thank you, Jan, once again for being here, and thank you, Mariam, for making your participation possible. And I also want to make a quick announcement that I'm greatly honored that Jan will be joining the Strategic Security Initiative as member of the board of advisors, and thank you for that as well. So now exactly. Now to zoom out a little bit towards Central and Eastern Europe, we know about the recent developments in Slovakia, Hungary, and Moldova. And I just wanted to ask you to put the developments like in the context of FIMI, Russian FIMI activities in Armenia, and the broader Central and Eastern Europe reality. So how these things are interconnected, and what are the main similarities and differences that you personally observed in these different settings. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megi. Thank you very much, Mariam, for inviting me for this nice event. Good evening, everybody. Apart from what Megi introduced me, I deal mostly with the South Caucasus, namely Armenia and Georgia. But for this sake of this event, I will be talking a little bit about my region. So I come from Slovakia. So I will talk a little bit about FIMI, Russian FIMI mostly, and Slovakia context, because it makes sense to compare it what we have had here and what we can see has been going on in Armenia, what Russians use as their playbook also in Armenia. So that's just the footnote, so that I understand quite well the regional dynamics in the South Caucasus, but would like to contribute with some views from the Central Europe. First of all, in Slovakia held its elections in September 2023, so it's already a couple of years ago, but it's interesting from that point that the elections of 2023 brought back Mr. Fico, who became a prime minister and is still prime minister of Slovakia until now. And I'm sure you are quite well aware that at the moment he is probably one of the last European leaders that is still visiting Moscow and shaking hands with Mr. Putin. And I would like to maybe mention a couple of points about the elections that brought him back to the fore. He was a prime minister also before, but for a brief period of time from 2020 and 2020 until 2023, there was a broad coalition government that was strongly pro-European and pro-Western. And exactly in that period of time, as we all know, Russia invaded Ukraine in the full formatted attack. And Slovakia at that time, under the previous government, was one of those countries which were supporting Ukraine really significantly. Slovakia borders Ukraine, that is very important to note. And along with Poland, we were one of the first countries to provide Ukraine with the military assistance, including ammunition and some key weapon systems such as MiG-29 or anti-aircraft weapons. So this was a government that was really strongly pro-European, and it was helping Ukraine a lot. And of course, this came to the focus of Moscow, obviously. And when there were elections in September 23, there was there were attempts from Russia's side to swing the political mood in Slovakia and bring to the fore Mr. Fico and some political parties which were campaigning with the idea that they want to focus on Slovakia and not on Ukraine. Mr. Fico was campaigning with the slogan, "Not a single bullet to Ukraine." So that was appealing in Moscow. However, here I have to say that unlike in Armenia's case, the Russia's FIMI before Slovak elections in 2023 were not like a strategic playbook, strategic roadmap towards the elections, but it was rather kind of a collation of individual activities, and I will highlight a couple of them just to get the sense of what was going on here before the elections. But as I must stress this, it was not like a strategic playbook, exactly one thing connected with another, and then the actions following in a strategic way. It was more about independent activities and actions by different actors, which were either directly connected with Russia or there are known connections with Russia. So those were Slovak actors maybe, but with the known connection with Russia. So what was the case of Slovakia? We had mostly fear-based rhetorics, so narratives that were trying to instigate fear among voters. And this was mostly concentrated around the idea of the war in Ukraine. So basically they were saying, if you will vote for the government that is supporting Ukraine, Slovakia will be involved in the war in Ukraine and Slovak boys will be sent as soldiers to Ukraine. So the narrative was one side was the party of peace and the second side was the party of war, or the candidates of the war as it was known. I know it might sound very familiar to some of you who are from Georgia, because there were very similar narratives in some other very recent elections. Then the second focus of FIMI was the identity mobilization, trying to portray the pro-European, that time, government, currently opposition, as those who are supporting non-traditional families and non-traditional minorities, unlike the guys that wanted to get to the power, the current government, and those who are aligned with the natural natural identities and those traditional values. So-called traditional values were very predominant narrative too. Then there were a couple of examples of symbolic humiliation. I will talk about that. Then, of course, there will be there were lots of conspiratorial framing of narratives, and then, of course, emotionally manipulative contents. Like, for example, your sons will be sent to Ukraine and they will be fighting for Ukraine unless the guys who are now in power will get to power. And we could see a couple of those tactics implemented, like in one very concrete example, which I will show you on one very concrete example, and that was the legitimization narrative, when pro-Russian groups and pro-Russian influencers were flooding the space before the elections, saying that the elections will be rigged by the West. This was very prevalent narrative, and 2 days before the elections themselves, in Slovakia, we have something that we call moratorium. It is a 2-day period when all media should not mention elections, should not deal with the elections, should give voters last 2 days of peace to think about their choices. So we call it electoral moratorium. So during these 2 days of moratorium, the director of Russian Secret Service SVR, Mr. Narishkin, in Russian television said that the elections in Slovakia will be manipulated by the US. Remember that that time that was administration of President Biden, and US was still the most feared enemy in Russia. So they were trying to portray that that there will be some kind of attempt to sway the elections towards the pro-Western, pro-American parties unfairly. Of course, nothing like that happened. The elections actually turned out to end up positively for Mr. Fico and his pro-Russian cohort. But then nobody was talking about the US meddling into the Slovak elections anymore after the elections were won by them, which is very interesting. But they used this narrative. They were talking about this narrative, actually, that the elections were rigged by the West. 1 year later, in the year 2024, when they wanted to push, when they were already in the power, Mr. Fico, he already formed the government with the coalition partners, and they came back to this narrative of Western meddling into the Slovak elections when he wanted to kind of defend changing of the legislature, which would make non-governmental organizations in Slovakia, the civil society, more transparent. So they wanted to introduce this law, which they copy-pasted from Orbán, which was copy-paste from the Russian law about NGOs. And when they were trying to explain in the parliament why Slovakia needs this law, they were saying, you know, we need this law because the West was trying through Slovak NGOs manipulate the elections. And as an example, they mentioned Zinc Network from the UK that supported before the Slovak elections a very small campaign focused on young people, especially students, in order they come to the vote. They didn't mention, the campaign didn't mention any specific party that they should vote to. They just wanted to increase the participation of the young people. Of course, the current government and Mr. Fico, they consider it as the attempt to support the opposition, the so-called liberal opposition, because it is generally known that the young people are usually voting mostly for the liberal parties or for that part and not for his political party. So that was one of the reasons that they gave to support their narrative. Second thing which I would like to mention was in September 2023, just before the elections, there was first attempt to use AI-generated deepfake to sway the elections. I mean, now deepfakes are quite common, and we are encountering them every day. But back then in 2023, in September, it was not that common, and this was one of the first cases when deepfake was used to try to sway the election results. What was the whole thing about? The leader of that time, strongest political party, Liberal Party, which was that time aspiring who came to the power, to the fore, and was in opposition to Mr. Fico, was heard on a video discussing with one very famous Slovak journalist, again from liberal or left-leaning daily newspaper, how they are discussing possibilities for meddling of the elections by buying votes among minority, specifically among Roma gypsies. Of course, this was a fake video. It was actually not that well done. It could be understood that it was AI generated. Back then, the technology was not so smooth as it is now. But still, they use it and they try to win over their voters by showing, look, these guys from the liberal spectrum, they are trying to buy votes by meddling with the minorities. And this deepfake was again published during that moratoria, during those 2 days period. So the actually the opposition could not even react to that deepfake video. So it had to be done by fact checkers who fact checked the veracity, and they showed that this is not a real video, but it is AI generated. And maybe I would use one last example. 1 year later, in the year 2024, we had presidential elections. And then there were again 2 candidates. One was supported by Mr. Fico and the current government, and of course more with views more pro-Russian, and the other one was supported by the current opposition. Again, more pro-European and more pro-Western. And it was really tight. And the first round of the elections was won by Mr. Korchok, who was the candidate of this pro-European coalition. And the second came supported Mr. Pellegrini, who was supported by Fico and political parties around him, those more right-wing leaning and nationalistic. Again, before the second round of the elections of the president, where only 2 best or 2 first candidates from the first round passed to, there was a strong information campaign trying to smear Mr. Korchok as a candidate of war. And again, trying to portray him as he will be the one who will lead Slovakia into the war, because he was supporting openly Ukraine. He was openly supporting assistance to Ukraine, whereas the other candidate, Mr. Pellegrini, was more accommodating to what Russia was requesting. And again, in this period of time, they came up with this fake fabrication of dossier of the former Communist Secret Service of Czechoslovakia, STB, which supposedly said that Mr. Korchok, the candidate of pro-Western opposition, was during the communist time, during his students' time, that he signed a cooperation with the that time Secret Service, which was later found out that it was a fabrication, and actually the official archive of the researchers which are dealing with this part of the history of Slovakia and Czechoslovakia actually issued official statement refuting this fake notion that was spread all around social media. And that's where I would like to get to. That was the way how these fake narratives were spread. Mostly they were started by certain actors, pro-Russian, mostly pro-Russian leaning, either openly or so-called alternative media actors. And then those narratives were then quickly picked up, mostly through Facebook. In Slovakia, Facebook is still very popular. And then also through Telegram channels, spread through bots, really armies of bots, and and this information were then spread through the information space. And I would like to mention maybe one more thing, which is quite interesting and has some direct connection with Russia. Just before the elections, a couple months before the elections, Slovakia declared persona non grata to Russian diplomats diplomats in brackets. One was deputy military attaché at that time Russia's embassy in Bratislava. He was caught on camera how he was paying money, literally cash, to one of these alternative media disinfluencer or actors. He literally gave him 1,000 euro in front of camera, which was a hidden camera of the Slovak counterintelligence. And he was telling him that this is from Moscow, this is for you and your friends for your good work. So they really caught him in the act. And of course, he was sent home packing. And then the second case was that was the economic attaché at the Russia's embassy, who couple of weeks before the elections was trying to maintain the network of bots and fake accounts on the social media and helping to spread the narratives, pro-Russian narratives through these channels. And he was literally buying the bandwidth on these bot farms, and he was identified as the agent of SVR, and he was also sent home very quickly. So that was like a direct activities of the Secret Service on Slovak territory. Very probably you followed also what was going on in Hungary just a couple of weeks ago. You know that they had very important elections in April 2026. And Orbán's regime has been a kind of a role model for the current Slovak government, and they were supporting each other, especially at the EU's level. And there was of course a high stake for the Russia to maintain Mr. Orbán in power, because Orbán was blocking some of the important sanctions at the EU level. For example, he was keeping Patriarch Kirill from the sanction lists. He also kept a couple of important oligarchs out of EU's sanctioned lists because he vetoed those potential sanctions. Together with Slovakia, they were blocking sanctions against current Georgia's regime under the Georgia's Dream. And also Hungary was blocking the financial assistance for Ukraine, which was now unblocked after Mr. Orbán lost the elections. So for Russia and for Moscow, it was quite important that Mr. Orbán is still in power in Budapest, because he was an important player in European Union as a kind of a spoiler with real power. But what was interesting to see, of course, there were quite strong supporting campaigns for Mr. Orbán, supported by the Russians as well. There were cases that the Russian team came to Budapest a couple of weeks before the elections, supposedly helping to coordinate the activities. But what was interesting, when I was talking about Russia complaining that the US is meddling into the Slovak elections, there were no Russian complaints about US meddling into the Hungarian elections during Hungarian elections in April. Despite the fact that even J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, they separately traveled to Budapest and came to support Mr. Orbán as their candidate and trying to win him some favors with the voters, but as we know, to no avail. At that time, Russia was not complaining that the US is meddling into the Hungarian elections, as long as they were both supporting the same political parties. So just very quickly to sum it up, not to talk too long, we could see we could see the same narratives being spread, or very similar narratives being spread in Slovakia and Hungary before the elections as they were used in Armenia. The tools were very similar. And they improved over time. In case of Slovakia, those were more like individual incidents and individual actions that were conducted before the elections. Then before Hungarian elections, that was already a prepared strategic playbook, which the Russia was using to help to keep Mr. Orbán in power. And we could see the same also in Armenia, that there was clearly a playbook how the influence was escalated, not only through FIMI, but also through direct actions such as the sanctions on some goods and products from Armenia not to be exported into Russia. So we see that there was this kind of a development with the development of strategy, with the different outcomes. Of course, Slovakia changed its government in 2023, and the government that is currently in power is helping Moscow in many ways in terms of fighting with Ukraine, and in terms of some influence within the European Union. In terms of Hungary, the elections did not turn out the way Moscow was hoping for. Mr. Magyar, the opposition to Mr. Orbán, won the elections by a huge margin, and is now basically has formed the government which has a constitutional majority, and now is turning around some of the policies of Mr. Orbán. And in Armenia, we could see that Mr. Pashinyan is continuing as a prime minister with a very strong mandate as well. So I would leave it here, and I will be open for other questions if you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much for providing this overview of Central European and Eastern European perspective, because this is all the time striking, even for me, who follows this developments very closely, especially from the point of view of Russian influence operations, how similar this narratives, techniques, methods are, and still we have these things repeating across the world, especially in our regions. So this is really interesting all the time. Now we'll move to the open discussion. So we have some of very interesting questions from our audience. So I will start with them. First is Nino Gelashvili. Thank you, Nino, for being with us, by the way, from Georgian Service of Radio Liberty. And Nino asks that one of the main differences between Armenia and Georgia in terms of countering probably FIMI are the roles of their governments play in that type of battle. Now, my question is, who were the main actors countering FIMI in Armenia during these elections? How effective was the government, and what was the part of the EU support in this context? And I would add to this also, just slightly from my part, is that as I mentioned, and as you described, there's like all these narratives and all these methods and all those techniques are pretty much the same in different settings and different countries and regions. But in some environments and in some cases, they are successful. In some cases, they are not. So I also wanted to add to Nino's question that why this is happening. The floor is like up to you, whoever wants to answer these questions. Who is going to answer? Probably Tigran will start.
I can start with the most visible answer, and I may not be fully inclusive of all actors involved, but great question. Let's start with, of course, I think it's very important to mention the domestic observers and fact-checkers that play a very important role, which include, but are definitely not limited to, newsrooms such as HEDC News, Media.am, CivilNet, etc., trying to research and publish fact-checking matters. But it's not only domestic fact-checkers, also international ones were definitely involved trying to counter certain narratives. But it's also, on the other hand, important to mention that the government has intervened in several ways, which by certain human rights bodies were actually reported, sometimes even concerning. For example, pre-trial detention of certain political actors or church-related people, but also new police surveillance powers that were utilized, such as tapping and listening to live to phone conversations of everyday citizens, trying to find out voter buyer incidents, etc., which of course raises some privacy concerns, and also certain assembly restrictions. So I think those are definitely worth mentioning, but I'm not sure if I'm covering. I'm sure there have been more actors involved in certain manners to try to counter measure. So please, anyone who wants to support me here, feel free.
Great. If there's, do you want to add something to this? Anybody? No. If not, I will move to other questions that we have here. Probably there are two questions that are addressed to Mariam. Probably I will combine them, Mariam. First is probably Naila. I don't know if I'm correct in pronunciation. She says that, as you mentioned, information manipulation increasingly exploits emotions rather than facts with policy, educational, or other responses. Do you see as most needed for building public resilience? And last but not least, definitely our good friend, very good friend of ours and our colleague, Olga Spirande asks question. The question is, to what extent do Russian information manipulation campaigns in Georgia and Armenia rely on the same strategic objective, discouraging European and Euro-Atlantic integration by portraying Western engagement as dangerous, unreliable, and incompatible with national security and identity? Thank you. So there's two questions.
Yes,
the floor is yours.
Two very interesting questions. Thank you both for them. Great to see, familiar surnames. And Oliko, thank you so much for your support to us. We really appreciate it. I'll start with the resilience part and the resilience question. I think that with the FIMI, we see this kind of, key lesson learned is that we really cannot fact check our way out of the resilience problem. So because the manipulation, it exploits fear, anger, identity, distrust, and the resilience in that case must be kind of societal rather than informational. And I always love to bring example of Nordic countries, for example, and they really give us some useful examples, because Finland, for example, is often cited because of the media literacy, which is integrated throughout the education system from a very early age. And students actually learn how to identify false information and how the influence and manipulation works. With Sweden's total defense approach, also another interesting case, we see that they treat information resilience as a part of national resilience. So the idea is that defending a society is not only responsibility of military or the government institutions, but actually citizens themselves. They play a great role in that. I love these examples when we talk about, ways how to create more resilient societies. And again, the resilience itself, it's not only about the media literacy or that kind of approaches. It's also about the how strong our institutions are, how transparent governance is. The role of independent media is, of course, very important. And yeah, at the end of the day, the goal is not to have citizens who believe everything or who disbelieve, but to have citizens and societies that actually think critically before they fall into the narratives and react emotionally. I'll go further to the second question, because we also had some very interesting. We always try to compare each other, and the FIMI in our countries is also the case. So in both cases, we see that the central objective is to discourage the deeper European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Primarily by portraying the Western engagement as unreliable, dangerous, and just incompatible with the national interests. But what's also interesting is that the narratives, they rarely attack Europe directly, but instead they focus on the security, sovereignty, and identity concerns within our countries. With the Armenian case, and as our research found, we have seen these dominant narratives that portray Russia as Armenia's indispensable partner, while it also was presenting the Western engagement as unable to provide any sort of meaningful security guarantees. And the narratives were that moving closer to Europe could lead to instability, conflict, and what is again often and now lately framed as the Ukrainization of Armenia. With Georgian case, for most of the, I would say, post 2008 and pre to 2024 period, because of the fact that Georgia pursued much longer and more deeply institutionalized sort of path and practical path towards the EU and NATO integration. And this was the NATO and EU were actually the central components of the state policy and public discourse. There and here, we would see that information manipulation efforts would be focused more on identity, sovereignty, traditional values, and narratives that would suggest that Western integration would actually undermine our Georgian culture, or also, as in case of Armenia, drag our country into the conflict. But also what we've seen recently is that it's not that these narratives are amplified or confined by the external influence ecosystems. We've seen that these elements of messaging that would be associated before with the pro-Kremlin information campaigns actually are entering the mainstream internal political discourse. And for example, in case of Georgia, it makes the Georgian information environment even more complex. There are more blurred distinctions in terms of the, whether it is the external or internal domestic narrative amplification. So again, at the end of the day, despite there are some contextual differences, the broader strategic objective is to increase uncertainty about the West, about the Western partnerships, and just weaken the confidence in the overall European path that is out there and on which currently, for example, Armenia stands.
Great, thank you, Mariam. I would like to ask the last question from the audience, and maybe we can wrap up with that. And this question definitely would go to all the speakers, but I think maybe Jan or Mr. Waal can answer that. Our fellow from International Security Program asked this question, Sydney Scheinfeld, and thank you, Sydney, by the way, for your engagement and organization of this webinar also. Do you think the increasing ineffectiveness of Russian influence campaigns internationally is influenced by decreased support for the Russian government domestically?
Interesting question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And I'm sure any of us have an answer, because we have to peer into the minds of of the Russian elite. Clearly, you're all aware there's a lot of discussion going on about a change of mood in Russia and what this could lead to. I think we can all see a scenario in which a Russian elite, which is weaker, is also more dangerous, perhaps, and more unpredictable. And that's, I think, a scenario that we could all be prepared for. Having said that, I think South Caucasus countries, I don't think I find it hard to see a military scenario in the South Caucasus countries. There is, as we've been mentioned, the Russian military base in Gyumri, but it's quite small. Many of the officers there are Armenian. I think the Armenian government is quite well protected by its Western friends, in particular the French and the Americans. But for sure, I think we have to anticipate that Russia can be very unpredictable, and we may be seeing a kind of struggle for influence now in Russia between those who are the kind of former, more globally minded Russians who would like to stop the war because of the economic damage it is having, and the more hardliners who want to continue the war and perhaps even want to escalate it. So I don't think we have any answers. I think we should be quite humble in our analysis of Russia, which is extremely opaque. But the question is good, but I don't really have a strong answer.
Thank you. Jan, maybe you want to add something?
Yes, I agree with Tom. We have to admit what we don't know, and there is lots of that we don't know about the current Russia and the social structure there, and especially the elite structures. What are their priorities? What are their means that they have available for pushing some of the ideas that are coming out, of course, from Russia, but we need to separate the signal from a buzz and from the noise. And also agree, as Tom mentioned, that at the moment probably it is unlikely that Russia would be capable of forcing its goals in Southern Caucasus militarily, or also in Moldova for that matter, because of the involvement into the war in Ukraine, and which is basically tying together most of the Russia's capabilities, military and also economical resources at the moment. We'll see what will be after the if there will be ceasefire or the peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, but that is probably a matter of a longer term development. But at the moment, I don't think that Russia has this kind of a military capacities. On the other hand, Russia has hybrid means on how to try to influence development, both in Armenia and also in Moldova, and obviously also in Georgia. Apart from Gyumri military base, there is also FSB base, which is right in the middle of Yerevan. So let's not forget about those guys. There is we don't know how many of them there is, but at least 150 is what's been reported. So there are other means Russia can employ also on the ground. On the other hand, also the EU is trying to do its part. When we discussed what was done against foreign influence, the EU sent a small team to Armenia to counter the hybrid threats. And now, after the elections, there is supposed to be a bigger team for a period of at least 2 years deployed in Armenia, consisting of some experts in hybrid threats and countering them from EU countries, which they will strengthen the current EU mission, which is on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, doing the observation. Of course, these missions are strictly non-military, but advisory, but can be helpful to build the capacities of Armenia.
Great, thank you very much to all the speakers. I think it's time to wrap up our discussion. I thank you, Jan, for mentioning this Ukrainian dimension, because I think this is really important in understanding why, on the one hand, Russia is growingly relying on influence operations recently, especially against European countries, and we see a lot of acts of sabotage and other activities across Europe, of course, almost every day. So this dimension is also important. We had some other questions, but I'm afraid we don't have time to answer, ask them and answer them, of course. Thank you to the audience for your engagement. It was really helpful, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thank you to our distinguished speakers, all of you. You provided really interesting insights, and your expertise is always helpful. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. And last but not least, I would like to thank the teams behind Strategic Security Initiative and Platform for Peace and Humanity for organizing this. And it's a special thanks to our fellows, Sydney, Muraz, and Tamar. Your engagement was really helpful. And thank you all once again. Stay with us. We will have many interesting discussions to come. Have a nice rest of